Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome into tonight's event. This is Caribbean Equality Project's Black History Month event. We're going to allow folks to get in. I know folks are, just checking their messages, seeing the links and everything to join us via YouTube and Facebook Live. So we're just going to allow some folks to get in and, we'll be waiting for y'all. All right, and of course, a happy Black History Month to a Black History and History Month to everybody who's joining us. No matter where you're joining us from right now, we are welcoming everyone into this space. It is officially night one of Caribbean Equality Project's Black Future Tings. We're excited, of course, always exuberant to have each and everyone just join us for tonight, where our theme for the night is defining queer and trans Black Caribbean future immigrant futurism. So I know the theme, it can sound a little bit complex, but trust me, we have four great speakers and participants tonight that are going to just break this down for everyone that can hear us, right? And view us tonight via YouTube, CEP's YouTube and Facebook live pages. All right. So for those of you who do not know, I am Theo Brown. I am the Public Relations Officer for Caribbean Equality Project, and of course, your host and moderator for tonight's proceedings. So again, I just want to welcome everybody in, and I'm just going to give folks some more time to get into the live and to just join us as we continue with the night's event. All right. All right. I see some folks coming in. That's good. That's good. And as we're moving right along, so Caribbean Equality Project is a community-based organization that serves Afro and Indo-Caribbean LGBTQ plus immigrants in Caribbean-centric neighborhoods in NYC, such as Little Guyana in Richmond Hill, Queens, Little Caribbean in Flatbush, of course, repping for the BK, that's in Brooklyn, and the Castle Hill neighborhood, Castle Hill and Soundview neighborhoods in the Bronx. Of course, and always have our Bronx sites on the call, so we welcome y'all to this event. The organization's work focuses on advocacy for LGBTQ plus and immigrants' rights, gender equity, racial justice, immigration, mental health services, and ending hate violence in the Caribbean diaspora. Since 2015, Caribbean Equality Project has been building political power hyperlocally through culturally congruent civic engagement, redistricting, census outreach, voter registration drives, get out the vote actions, and legislative advocacy. And I'm looking at this and I'm just like, wow, and I'm hearing myself talk on the side 2015. We have been at this thus long. 7 years if my math is correct, and you can correct me in the chat if my math is off. But that's how long we've been at this work, just grinding at the wheel and just producing everything, or producing and doing everything we have done on a community-based level, grassroots organizing level for those amount of years. So again, just thank y'all for joining us tonight. And we're keeping the program moving and just welcoming folks into the space as we continue with the night's proceedings. All right, and we also want to be able to, of course, acknowledge the land on which we are based on right now, and the lands that were once settled by the indigenous persons. So I have what is called our land acknowledgement that I want us to, of course, acknowledge and just focus on tonight before we get into the rest of the proceedings. On behalf of the Caribbean Equality Project, we wish to acknowledge the land we are situated on, which includes but are not limited to sites that are now called the New York City, right? Toronto, Guyana, Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago, of course, among others. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Lenape, Rockaway, and Canarsie communities. As we are positioned in a time of ongoing pandemics and precarity, and largely continue to gather as non-Indigenous and settler communities, it is essential to be reminded of our commitment to solidarity, coalition, and decolonization efforts in support of Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. Turtle Island, now which we now know as North America. So that, of course, that encapsulates all 50 states of America and Canada to our north. Alrighty. Since time immemorial, these indigenous communities have lived on these lands and survived genocide and forced relocation by imperial powers. The Caribbean Equality Project acknowledges that it was founded upon the death, exclusion, and erasure of many indigenous peoples, including those on whose land we now occupy and organize on, respectfully and respectively. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, right? Which is why we are also here tonight to discuss, why Black Lives Matter and why Black History Month is essential, and through celebrating through a queer and trans viewership lens. All right. And at this moment in time, we are going to be honoring folks who we have lost along the way due to a variety of issues that have arisen throughout the years gone by, especially in the years that have encapsulated this ongoing pandemic. So this is to honor the countless Black lives lost to COVID, police brutality, and the various injustices which plague Black bodies in the world. We honor and remember all of those we have lost to suicide, intimate partner violence, HIV/AIDS, and of natural causes. Thank you for that moment of silence and for observing this recognition and, out of respect for those who we have lost, who are resting well, and we just continue this work and this advocacy in their memory and in their names. Alrighty, so we have coming up, we have a program called the Live Pridefully exhibition. Is actually already underway. And what we're going to be doing this Saturday, February 19th at 2 p.m. in the Queen's Museum, we're actually going to be recognizing that work with our reception. So as part of the Queen's Museum's Year of Uncertainty, the Caribbean Equality Project is proud to present Live Pridefully, Love and Resilience Within Pandemics, an interdisciplinary exhibition that celebrates queer and trans Caribbean resilience through a racial justice lens, while fostering critical conversations related to pride, migration, surviving, colliding pandemics, and coming out narratives. Curated by our own Mohamed Q. Amin, the founder and executive director of Caribbean Equality Project. In a year of uncertainty, Live Pridefully reimagines and affirms Black and Brown LGBTQ+ immigrants and asylum seekers as essential workers, creatives, and contributors to the cultural diversity of New York City. So on Saturday, February 19th, as I mentioned, join us sharply at 2 p.m. We are hosting an exhibition reception and community celebration at the Queen's Museum. Join us, alrighty? Capacity is now capped at a certain amount, so please go ahead and use the registration link that will be flashing across your screen that already has been placed on our social media platforms, Caribbean Equality Project on Instagram and Facebook, and at Caribbean Equality on Twitter, alrighty? And with that being said, we have a little gift and a little surprise to show y'all.
What does it mean to live pridefully?
How do you define love and resilience within pandemics?
During this era of uncertainty,
the Caribbean Equality Project's Live Pridefully exhibition at the Queen's Museum
reimagines and affirms Caribbean LGBTQ+ immigrants and asylum seekers
as essential workers, creatives, and contributors to the cultural diversity of New York City.
Live Pridefully celebrates Black and Brown queer and trans embodied resilience by fostering critical conversations
to amplify stories of pride,
migration,
surviving colliding pandemics,
and coming out narratives.
Love and resilience within pandemics means standing in solidarity against anti-Asian hate violence.
Resilience means owning our vulnerabilities, telling our stories, and speaking truth to power.
Live Pridefully means fighting for Black, trans liberation.
Live Pridefully means serving your community, caring for the impacted, and fighting for LGBTQ rights and justice.
Love and resilience mean using my voice to fight for gender equity and honoring my Indo-Caribbean ancestors.
To live pridefully means advocating for immigration reform and protecting LGBTQ asylum seekers.
I live pridefully.
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 All right. All right. Thank you so much for, that display of what to expect this coming Saturday, February 19th, 2 p.m., Queens Museum. Get yourself signed up and get somebody else signed up to come with you. That's just like the precursor to this amazing exhibition. Of course, like I mentioned, curated by our own Mohammed Kiwamin and some of the folks behind this very production tonight. So we can't wait for y'all to join us and to see y'all faces in person. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this will be our first grand scale in-person activity / event since the pandemic has impacted our lives in so many different ways. So we can't wait to see your smiling faces. Masks are required, and the other requirements to join in on Saturday's activity are right there on our social media platforms. Do read and do come celebrate with us. Live pridefully. Now, as we continue to live pridefully, speaking of which, we have our COVID-19 relief fund, our 2022 COVID-19 relief fund that we started at the beginning of the pandemic, when the pandemic really started impacting us in the year 2020, right? Which seems so far away, just 2 years in. But when the pandemic it started impacting us, we as a team came together and decided, what can we do best in order to support our communities that were ailing at the time, right? And still are in need of support. So to support the Caribbean LGBTQ plus population in NYC, CEP started a COVID-19 emergency relief fund to provide mutual aid to those that lost their jobs and were on the verge of losing their homes. The organization has distributed an astounding $70,000 to over 300 plus persons in financial relief to this very date, mainly to undocumented LGBTQ plus immigrants, asylum seekers, sex workers, and queer families. Small grants to community members ranged between $100 to $300 and covered basics such as rents, Metro cards, food, medical bills, and utilities. We know that COVID-19 has ravaged and impacted our most vulnerable communities. And our work here with the COVID-19 Relief Fund actually encapsulates our racial justice work that we do on a daily basis here at CEP, at Caribbean Equality Project. The undocumented LGBTQ plus excluded workers are still being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Many of our community members have lost their employment, but don't qualify for unemployment benefits based on their undocumented refugee and/or asylum status. So in 2021, we continued running our food justice program to ensure our community receives the life-saving resources they need to navigate the ongoing and ever-evolving COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, we continue to center community care to keep our marginalized communities safe and protected through resource mobilization and love, of course, because that's a main part of our work, right? Love is love, and we continue to live pridefully through love. In doing this COVID-19 relief work, through the donations we've received through our emergency COVID-19 relief fund, we actually were able to organized 14 culturally responsive pop-up pantries, and served over 3,600 families. That's 31,500 people when you break that down math-wise, right? So many of whom are undocumented and documented to some extent, but are mainly low-income Afro and Indo-Caribbean persons, South Asians and Latinx immigrants, including LGBTQ plus persons, right? Because that's the basis of the how we serve as an organization, is our LGBTQ community first and foremost and at the center of attention. Seniors, homeless, and HIV impacted persons. We're still collecting donations for our COVID-19 relief fund and food justice work, all of which continue in 2022. Contribution links are currently being displayed on the screen. You can always access these as well at CaribbeanEqualityProject.org or via CaribbeanEqualityProject.org, and of course via the links that you're now seeing on your screen. All these donations and proceeds go towards the Emergency Relief Fund, specifically targeting COVID-19 relief efforts. All right, and we also want to show you a little something on our end as to how your contributions help with the COVID-19 relief and food justice work.
So show me what community looks like! This is what community looks like! Show me what community looks like! This is what community looks like! Show me what community looks like! This is what community looks like! One more time, I need to hear those voices. Show me what community looks like! This is what community looks like!
Hi, my name is Mohammed Q. Amin.
This is your favorite councilwoman, Rita Joseph.
My name is Winsome Pendergrass.
My name is Nirmala Singh.
I'm the founder and executive director of the Caribbean Equality Project.
I'm here today in partnership with Caribbean Equality Project.
I'm here representing Flatbush Mixtape.
I'm a member of New York Communities for Change.
I'm a founding board member of South Queens Women's March.
We saw what COVID-19 did to us in terms of food insecurity.
And we realized how serious it is that our people are in need.
And what we've done this year is continue a tradition we started in 2020, and we organized 3 holiday food and essentials distributions in Soundview in the Bronx, Flatbush, Brooklyn, and Richmond Hill, Queens.
So we worked. We give out so much food.
And we've been distributing culturally responsive groceries such as like cabbage and rice and chickpeas.
And also providing toys and putting a smile on the faces of the children of my district.
Including children's books. Reading is fundamental, and we need to also promote reading right now.
These particular pantries, they were very different compared to our bi-monthly pantries. More specifically, we did twice the number of packages. So we did 1,200 wear a mask package, which includes 10 masks, hand sanitizers. We also did 1,200 safe sex packets, which include condom, lubes, instructions. And we did 1,200 oral hygiene packages, which include toothbrushes, toothpaste.
We know that folks that live in the NYCHA houses are the most impacted community members, and that means that we have to bring the resources to them.
So we really realized that we really have to meet our community members where they are on the streets in South Queens.
So it was up to us to feed our people and to help keep them safe.
And where our elected officials, those that are currently in power, failed us, it was community organizations like Caribbean Equality Project that stepped up to say we're going to serve our community with love and joy while maintaining their dignity.
It's a great moment for us to bond and build together, but also for us to give back.
That's what food justice work in New York City is all about, protecting and loving the most vulnerable community members.
We need you to help us continue to fight food insecurity in New York City by making a donation to the Caribbean Equality Project.
And they were there for the community. So I thank them for their partnership and today for being in my district to help serve the community.
This is an act of solidarity, and we really want to support our community members, and we will continue to do this work.
On behalf of all of us at Caribbean Equality Project,
On behalf of Flatbush Mixtape,
On behalf of South Queens Women's March,
On behalf of myself and all the volunteers at the Caribbean Equality Project,
happy holidays.
happy holidays.
happy holidays and happy new year. We will continue fighting food insecurity in 2022, and we will continue to love and protect each other. Happy holidays.
You've just witnessed is another production from the World is Rich Productions that captured all of what we did in 2021 regarding food justice work and how we were able to strategically help persons within the New York City to get some food justice relief through the COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund. Right, you saw the organizers there, of course, some of the persons who are on this very call right now, and you know, of course, in the background making things work. They were there to witness and to help out folks. Of course, have a great holiday season. That was back in December, and then also in previous months leading up to the end of 2021. Because we're doing this work year round. And this is why we are encouraging folks to keep sending in those donations, sending in those contributions. We acknowledge each and every single one of them. And we thank everyone that has contributed, are doing so right now, and will do so during this live and, you know, afterwards as well. Because we need your help and your efforts and every ounce of all that you can give, whether it be your time, your money, or your efforts to make sure that our communities are well served across New York City. And tell somebody about Caribbean Equality Project today who may not know, already know about our work and the efforts that we're doing here hyper locally. Now we're going to look at what we talk about when we try to engage folks through civic engagement, which, you know, focuses on voting rights and, you know, everything that goes into that, including doing our census. I know the census was last done in 2020, but we're always looking ahead to the next one that comes around, right? So through our Mash Up the Vote campaign, we actually envision a future where we can all vote equitably and equally like everybody else in this country. We envision a future here at Caribbean Equality Project where we are not constantly having our voting rights, you know, trying to be shunted to the side or just taken off the table or just continually being discussed and no action being taken. So what we decided to come up with, leading into, you know, all the activity that happened in 2020, we came up with the Mash Up the Vote campaign. Our vote is our voice. And we continue to emphasize and stress that throughout everything that happens in our community, because everything that that happens to us, you know, that sometimes it comes down the pipeline from somebody else on top who's making all these decisions. And we need to be civically engaged in order to make sure that the right persons are at the helm making these decisions on our behalf. So, of course, right now on a federal level, we are looking to get the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Acts passed through our federal Congress, right? That's based in DC. And, you know, in our efforts to amp up support for these bills, these laws that we want to get passed through Congress to ensure that, you know, it's easier for Black and brown folks to vote, right? To be able to show up to the polls or mail that ballot in early or participate in the primaries. We want to make sure that these bills are passed so that folks have greater access to the ballot. We can't afford to have our rights rescinded or pulled back or just, you know, try to be drawn away from us after all these years of fighting. You know, we're not going to let Dr. M.L. King and, of course, John Lewis and every civil rights advocate that advocated for voting rights all those years ago in the 60s with the civil rights movement, we're not going to let their efforts go in vain. We're going to keep fighting to make sure that we mash up the vote at every election, at every municipal, you know, gathering and happening that elects persons and selects persons that we put in power in order to represent our communities. This is how we get work done. This is how we ensure that we raise our communities out of being disenfranchised to finally having a full equitable seat at the table. So as you can see there from the flyer, or the New York City primaries, the primary election happens on June 28th, 2022, right? We want to make sure that folks know about these primaries, because the primaries lead into the general elections that happen in the fall. So primaries are usually in the summertime that then, lead into and segue into the fall election. So we want to make sure that folks are aware of this date and aware of the primaries that are happening and that will be coming up across the nation as we, mash up the vote and make sure that everybody that is eligible to vote can actually vote and participate in elections. So our civic engagement work in 2021 actually saw us getting to the point where, the New York State legislature was able to pass our city or vote, and it gives over 1 million green card holders electoral power in municipal / citywide elections, right? So persons who are not a citizen but hold a green card in the New York City state, New York State and New York City are now able to participate in the local and hyper local election movements that will select the persons to best represent them statewide and citywide, New York, and primarily New York City, right? So we want to make sure that we keep those initiatives going via our Mash Up the Vote campaign. Again, your contributions and your financial and monetary donations to CEP help this work to continue, to keep going throughout the years, especially as we seek to impact, and create change at the local levels here in New York City. Our 2022 civic engagement work continues with building political power in New York City for Black, queer, and trans persons, as well as with everyone else within our communities. So, keep spreading the word. We're going to keep mashing up the vote as the year goes on. Alrighty. And with that being said, we are now at the point where we want to have this discussion, right? That's why we're all gathered here to discuss future Black things, right? And Black future things all together. So, we want to be able to get into the meat of the matter and start talking to our panelists. I'm sure y'all have heard enough from me for the moment. So I want to bring in some other voices that we have carefully selected and curated for tonight's panel discussion. And, we want to just bring their voices in, bring their faces in as well, and, have folks just come in as I work on introducing them. All right, so I see them popping up on my screen. So that means they're on your screen as well, too. We have, let me see here, we have Zoe Sazzle, pronouns she, her. She is an artist and trans rights activist. And what I'm going to do tonight is to make sure that we keep it short and nice and sweet. I'm just going to say what I know about these persons personally, but they're going to be able to tell you about themselves as we start the discussion. I'll give them the honor of doing that. I think they deserve that much grace, right? So starting with Zoe, she's an artist and activist, like I said, and, of course, consider herself a queen. In her performances, one of which you'll see tonight, she also goes by Miss Janae, right? And she's been doing this work since 2013 in creating safe spaces for queer people, as well as curating contemporary queer Caribbean culture. All righty. And we're also gonna introduce Stephanie Garnett, pronouns she, her, hers. Of course, Stephanie is Jamaican born and she is living in New York City. Right now, she is a licensed practical nurse, certified radio broadcaster, and a passionate volunteer with the Caribbean Equality Project, and also one of our asylum seekers who have benefited from the services that we, through our asylum seeking services that we offer here at CEP. Again, funds from our COVID-19 relief and everything that we're able to also help asylum seekers with, the work that they're doing alongside CEP. We also have, of course, Antoine Craigwell. So Mr. Craigwell here, of course, he goes by he, him pronouns. And let me see here. He is also the founder and CEO of DBGM Inc., right? And Antoine is Guyanese. And, make sure you probably know that when you talk to him. And he's a trained journalist who has written for several local and national publications, and is also a graduate of the City University of New York school system. All right, so it's like we have a New York native and a Guyanese native all mixed into one. And last but not least, we have Mr. Harry Peter Johnson. Of course, he, him pronouns, and he's a social worker specialist and also the fundraising coordinator for the Men of Faith group, Men of Faith, of which we work with collaboratively in order to do much of our community outreach work, whether it be through food justice and other means. So I would just want to take some time to welcome in our panelists. They're here. If you want to just go ahead and give them a round of applause while they're appearing on your screen, and as we're getting ready to just get this panel underway. All right, I want us to start tonight by everyone just briefly describing themselves and the work that they do, and give our viewers an example of something that you love about being Black. And I want to start off with the ladies because it's ladies first. So, Zoe, Miss Sazzle, you have the
Hi, good night, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. So great to join again virtually with the Caribbean Equality Project. So lovely to be alive. What a time to be alive. To mention a bit about my work, as Theo mentioned, I am a cultural practitioner, artist, activist, and a lot of my activism work has been done through the voice and the lens of culture creation, creating contemporary queer culture in Caribbean spaces. Something I love about being Black is, as I said, what a time to be alive. You know, I think that we are in a time when the focus and the lens of the world has kind of tuned its ear and its eye to the beauty inherent in Blackness, Black skin, Black culture, Black essence, Black soul. And to be a part of that community is, I mean, what a time to be alive.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you. We're going to bounce it over to, of course, Stephanie. You have the floor. Or the mic, since we're
my name is Stephanie Garnett. I'm currently working at Lowe's as a credit card representative for Lowe's. I'm proud to be Black, and what I love about being Black is our culture, our soul, and our food.
All right. So thank you so much for that. And I know we've seen some of Stephanie's creations on Instagram. You'll be able to follow her with some of the handles that we'll drop in the chat, and that's already there on social media. So we want to thank you for that, Stephanie. Antoine, you're welcome. Antoine.
Thank you very much, Theo, and thank you guys at Caribbean Equality Project for inviting me to be part of this panel and this discussion. I think it's important, not just in Black History Month, but throughout the year when we talk about our Black communities. One of the things that I like about being Black is the richness of our history, that Black history predates the slave trade. And that is so rich and powerful that it is unfortunate that our colonial masters and colonialists have sought and worked hard to erase our identities and our sense of self. And one of the things I like about our progress, our development today, is the efforts we are making to reclaim that identity, that authenticity, that sense of who we are, that we existed long before the colonialists came to Africa to seize us, to sell us, to trade us, and to consider us as less than human, that we were fully human before. And I know I look light-skinned, as somebody commented on a Facebook post that I had about me not being Black. And I had to remind them, as long as I'm not blonde hair and blue-eyed, for these Americans, I am Black. In the Caribbean, I might be a high red or a high yellow, but I'm still very much Black. And I can dance a kwekwe, and I can beat a drum if it comes to it. So culture is also part of that for me.
See, there you have it, folks. You see what I tell you? When you talk to Antoine, you'll make sure to remind you that he's Guyanese first, and then everything else flows from there, right? So we thank you for that, Antoine. And we want to give Harry the mic for his introduction and about, saying something that, why you love being Black.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to be a part of Caribbean Equality, the organization that I constantly looking up and see the great work you guys been doing for the last 7 years. I mean, you guys doesn't have an office space, a brick and mortar, but the work you guys doing is a testament of the love and the dedication of your generation is making waves in New York and beyond. And it's also always a pleasure to partnership with Caribbean Equality to make changes and to make a change for the lives of folks, marginalized community in New York City. I'm also a social worker. I work with substance abuse and mental health issues, community organizer, father. And what I like of being Black, to be in certain space where I'm the only Black man can actually give a voice for the voiceless. Because I will tell you later on the reason why, as a Black man, as a social worker, there are spaces that sometimes we need Black folks to be in to make different and to make corrective measures and to be voiced, to be part of the gatekeeper. So I love being Black. I love to be out there, to be a follower of ancestors who have been here before and folks who have come before me, who shoulders I'm actually look upon to. So I'm also glad to be a part of this this evening discussion. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Harry. I appreciate that. I remember, seeing something, one of the memes on social media that said some years back, right? That said, I love being Black. This ish is kind of lit. It's dangerous, but it's kind of lit at the same time, right? And I think that each of everything that y'all have said just now just does kind of reiterate what that meme said, because it also does encapsulate all your intersectionalities and everything that represents each and every one of y'all on this live right now. So definitely thank you for that. We're gonna popcorn it over to Zoe. Zoe, what type of organizing work were you doing in Trinidad, right? So for those who didn't know that Zoe is from Trinidad, there you go, the cat is out the bag, right?
I can't believe I didn't mention that.
No, it's all good, because we're going to find a way to bring it back to that anyways, right? That's what we do.
Yes, I am indeed Trini.
Exactly. How organizing work, that you were doing in Trinidad, how does it help in imagining or creating an imagination and the realization of a more generative future for Black people?
Yeah, a lot of my work in Trinidad was based, very specifically in the advancement of the LGBT community. And then even later on, more specifically focused on the trans and gender non-conforming community. And I worked kind of across the board with a lot of different organizations, some on a more permanent basis, but I pride myself on the fact that my work was very much amongst many organizations and not just with one or two or a few. And I think that especially at this time in the Caribbean, the work actually is the birthing of the new imagination and the new future for how we see ourselves, the ways in which we believe that we could exist as Black people, and the identities that we believe we are capable of inhabiting, that are also true to just who we are. I think that's part of the revolution that's happening in the Caribbean now. Is in the past, our Blackness and our cultural identity stifled different expressions of individuality and different expressions of our truths, very specifically with regards to gender expression, sexualities. And I think now a lot of the work that we are doing is kind of breaking those barriers and encompassing, that future of a broader identity spectrum for Caribbean people, for Black people, and also then representing ourselves in ways that we're able to see each other and see ourselves and know that our cultural and racial identities are still valid in these expanded gender and sexual identities also. So that's a lot of the work that's happening, and I think there's a way to go, but to celebrate that we've already begun to make strides, it's so important.
Excellent. We love to hear it, Zoe. We love to hear that from you. And that's a good picture of just your background and where you're coming from and how you've contributed to the landscape of this work, right? And let me go ahead now. Steph, you have the mic next. Stephanie, you have the mic next. Now, how are you supported by Caribbean Equality Project throughout your asylum seeking process? Can we get a synopsis on that?
Okay, Okay, Carmen Equality has been a huge help to me, giving me a lot of letters to support my case to my lawyers, information, um, going around speaking with different people, get a little idea of how the asylum case works. And you guys have been like a really huge help, open up my eyes, let me know exactly what's going on with different cases and different people and how should we approach it. And I really appreciate all that you guys have done for me.
Good, good. I know that, when we specifically reached out to you, Stephanie, to be a part of this event tonight, just this movement tonight, you are very enthusiastic about participating, right? And you're just like, yeah,
Yes.
whatever it is, just get me ready for it and just give me the mic and let's go, because there's so much that Urban Equality Project has done for my case and my cause, since I began interacting with the organization about 2 or 3 years ago. So definitely thank you for being a part of this conversation tonight and for having this presence with us.
And yes, and thank you guys for being a huge help to me and my daughter. Thank you.
Of course. That keep that pin right there, because we're going to mention, of course, bring up your daughter later on in this conversation. We can't go without acknowledging her and the impact she's had on your life. Antoine, if you were to make a change as to how Black History Month is celebrated and performed in this country, in particular, what would that change look like? What would those changes be, right? And what would you want to see become a permanent part of the Black History Month discussion, the discourse, much like we're having right now? I believe you have to unmute, Antoine, before we can hear your inputs. There you go.
You think I would know to do this by now?
2 years.
I know, right? Thank you very much for that question, Theo. And I think it's an important question for our communities to consider. Particularly now we're 2 years into a global pandemic and looking at the way it has impacted many of our lives. I have a fundamental problem with the way that America has utilized or taken different ethnicities and tried to create things out of them for just a moment. But rather, I would suggest that if we want to talk about Black history, that it's not be confined to just 1 month, that it is an ongoing process. It is throughout the year. It is every week. It is every day that we highlight and we raise up and acknowledge Black people who have made significant contributions to our communities, to our lives. When I talk about Black people, I'm not just talking, as a matter of fact, I had to correct somebody at a meeting yesterday where they had a PowerPoint slide saying about African American, and I had to correct them very clearly to say, not all, that African American is not all Black people. You have Afro-Caribbean, you have Afro-Guyanese, you have Africans here, you have, Afro-Europeans. So the thing about it is that if we want to talk about celebrating Black people, Black history, let us raise up all the many Black people. What about Josephine Baker? What about Tina Turner? What about Marcus Garvey? What about Patrice Lumumba? What about Nelson Mandela? What about Walter Rodney? What about Maurice Bishop? What about Bob Marley? Okay? What about all these people who are integral to how we are and who we say we are and who that help us further our sense of self and our sense of identity? When we talk about Black Americans, it's not just Martin Luther King. What about Bayard Rustin? What about Langston Hughes? Okay? What about all the other Black people who have struggled and suffered? What about Madam C.J. Walker, for God's sake? Okay? There are many Black people who have done a whole lot to raise up themselves and their communities, to give themselves, to create pride in their communities and pride in themselves, to remind the white community that Black people are human and Black people are capable of a whole lot more than just being servants. So we need to celebrate Black people throughout the year. We can't do it in 28 days or 29 days, depending on whether it's 365 or 366. So we need to be able to look at Black history throughout the entire year and celebrate Black people. Has anybody been talking about Henrietta Lacks recently, other than the fact that her cells were used and her family now suing Johns Hopkins for compensation. Has anybody talked about other Black people who have been abused? What about Black people who have been used in mental health experiments to see how shock therapy will work on Black people so that white people can be treated? So let's celebrate Black people throughout the year, not just 1 month. I'm sorry. I just had to go on a rant. Thank you.
Actually, your rant has actually fired. Well, I wouldn't consider it a rant. You're giving a very passionate and impassioned response to the queries, right? Because you're actually firing up our audience. I see them chiming in and getting their questions ready for whenever we have that section available, and they're very much agreeing with much of what you're saying tonight. Because one of the things that I've also someone said it, and an African American, somebody born here who's Black, right? Born in the US that's Black, actually said it. And I was just like, you're absolutely right. They said that February is just our anniversary. It's Black History 365 and a quarter days when it's a leap year. February is just the anniversary. We have the big shindig celebration in February, but it's Black History throughout the rest of the year, because that's how we also emphasize and reemphasize that Black Lives Matter, right? This is how we keep that narrative going and keep that remembrance going. And I think you're absolutely right with something you said, Antoine, about some of the persons, a majority of the persons that you've mentioned. We think of Bayard Rustin and the gentleman a part of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes. We think of those persons. When I learned about them in the Caribbean back in high school in Jamaica, nothing was mentioned to me that these persons were queer and or identify as gay men. That aspect was specifically left out of the narrative and the literature. Much of what we see happening or has happened with the conversations and the textbooks that have so-called Black history in this country. There's a lot of erasure that happened, including with Henrietta Lacks, as well, or as they would call her, he Lacks for short, because of the genetic work that was done, that was used to further studies across the spectrum of science and technology. So most definitely. Harry, I want to pop on over to you real quickly. And can you talk to us a little bit about your upbringing? Of course, we know you're one of the persons on the live tonight that's representing this country over here, for those who don't know, and of course the country behind you, who, had you been alive, Mr. Marley, would have been 77 this year, as of 2 weeks ago. So talk to us about your upbringing and what was life like for you as a mere child. And please mention, I wanted to mention something because I know you personally, mention something that makes your childhood very specific, because it's not one of you, if you get what I'm saying. So please.
Oh my God.
I like that. You know, I like it. I love it. So go ahead.
Okay. What do you want to say? I'm a twin. I'm also identical twin. My other twin brother is a Republican evangelical in Colorado. So my upbringing was under a strict family, Christian. I pretty much was preparing to be a priest. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church. I was groomed to be a priest. Mother and father very strict, do all the good stuff. But one of the things, growing up in Jamaica, in Falmouth, is I know where I get that strength to be in activism is I remember this couple in my town was attacked being a gay couple. And that thing leave a very bitter taste in my life. And forever seeing that, I was troubled by the attack, and I really wanted to fight back, but I was still young. And I think that's where I get this zest to be in social justice and activism. So I was involved with a lot of the community stuff in terms of cultural stuff, in terms of the youth fellowship, president, doing all the church stuff, the community civic organization, doing civic stuff in center around that town. But I think I didn't see my plan was to be geared towards an Episcopal priest, Anglican priest. So it's when pretty much I migrate to America, then I was exposed to the culture, to see different ism, different system, and I realized that's where what I want to do. I was tired seeing in Jamaica class system, oppression, marginalization of folks who were identified differently, and people looked upon them differently. And I think that I was even have a conversation with my mom, and I was saying, this is not right, and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, you're with your family, you live there, you just have to shut up and deal with it. So when I migrated to America, I started doing college, I started to realize that I need to have a voice. I need to be out there, to be a fighter, to fight for marginalized folks, fight for folks who are oppressed in terms of these systems. And so that's propelled me to where I'm at right now. And one of the things that really I've seen where racism and sexism really plays a role is when I was a case manager working with HIV patient, where I was working, these patients were people of color, and the white social worker, when they were supposed to place in housing, they were placing the white gay men in Manhattan, in Chelsea, and the black folks were supposed to go to Harlem, the Bronx, or whatever. So that was an issue that I feel wasn't right. And somebody said to me, I went to a training, and this lady said, you know what, you'll be a great social worker. And that propelled me to further my education to be a part, to be a change agent, and to fight for folks who doesn't have voice, who doesn't look like me. Because as you know, social worker is pretty much has a lot of a white female perspective, and they need for have black voices, because the population we represent, the population we're fighting for, sometimes doesn't look like the folks who are actually on the other side. So that's what propelled me. But back to my upbringing. My upbringing was, I said, it was under a family of 9 of us, mother and father, very supportive, but at the same time, as I was constantly questioning and actually challenging my family in terms of what I used to see in my town and what I see was different. And as I said, sometimes I listen to Bob Marley music, and I suddenly see some of the messages that he's actually sending out. So those are key moments to see that Bob Marley was actually doing the work and telling us that these are a system that needs to be dismantled. And that I'll pause right there.
Exactly. Thank you for those points. And I want to identify with something that you said earlier about your upbringing and everything. I know for a fact that, persons coming from the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s Caribbean, right, and early 90s, right? A majority of us, before we come here, we were raised in such a strict religious upbringing, right? And notice I said religious, not spiritual, very pious upbringing. And, I know that played a lot in where we are today, and how we identify, and even with our coming out stories and all that stuff that happened to get us to identify as, openly queer, etc., etc. I know that we share a lot of similarities with our backgrounds. It was being raised in the church and everything we saw unfold over the years of just being raised in our respective Caribbean home territories, our homelands, right? So definitely thank you for that perspective. It's definitely, and it creates definitely looking towards the future where this conversation is concerned. All right, Zoe, you have the mic, my dear, once more. And what is the importance of imagination when we talk about the future for the African diaspora?
I think, imagination comes hand in hand with creativity. And imagination allows us to create that which has not existed before. It also allows us to incorporate that which has come before into the creation of the current and the future. And thinking about the future of the African diaspora, I think, there's life in imagination and in being able to create for ourselves the new future that allows us to exist unashamedly, exist in the fullness, the full inhabitation of our identities. And then also being able to incorporate within that all of our culture, all of the richness in our history that has come before. And find new ways to reimagine that and then relive it in the future. I think that's kind of part and parcel and key to our survival. We've seen it as part of the survival experience of other races and not just races but peoples across this world. And I think now, especially, we have such a potent opportunity. We see it happening a lot in music now. And I think Bob Marley is kind of a cornerstone in this conversation that I foresee we will continuously revolve and come back to. But being able to take the richness of our history especially now, our history as Black people, and using our current imagination and also using our current tools to reinvigorate that history and reintegrate it with current expressions, current imaginations. Really, I think that's key to our not only survival but our thrival, and how we access a whole new sense of life and possibility within that life as African peoples going forward.
Right, right, right. I definitely identify with majority of what you just said, especially in the beginning of your response, right? And I want for when this recording hits our social media platform for folks to go back and listen to a majority of these responses, right? And listen to what Zoe just said about, creating these futures and using our imagination and creativity. I want for folks to revisit these aspects and take some motivation from what she has just said, and other persons on the live have said about their realities, right? And how we're going to shape these futures going forward, because we're definitely getting some gems tonight as we continue this discussion. And before we move on to Antoine, I wanted to mention and just mention something that Antoine had said earlier too. Just with the just the impact that we create with Black history, right, and how we change that discussion going forward in shaping this conversation tonight. One of the discussions that one of the questions that we came up with as the creators and the co-creators of this event was, wait, do we even celebrate Black History Month in the Caribbean, right? And it made us pause and think about it. And for me, I piped up quickly and I was just like, yes. Are we forgetting the impacts of Marcus Mosiah Garvey? We don't overlook him where I come from. There is a celebration, that acknowledges that, especially around this time of year. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know when we talk to a majority of the Caribbean folks, it was like it really made persons pause. And I'm talking about I reached out to folks from Barbados, from of course Guyana, some from even some of the smaller territories to make them think. It's like, wait, do we even celebrate Black History Month where we're from, or is that an American or global North thing, right? And with that being said, Antoine, how has your orientation impacted the ways in which you have engaged with Black History Month, and has that changed throughout the years, right? And I believe you have to unmute again, Mr. Craigwell.
And you would think that by now I would know this, okay?
Yeah, that's all right, because we're going to take that pause, that slightly pregnant pause, as you preparing your response. It's fine. We don't work with it.
So that's a really interesting question, because it's a question that encourages me to go back and look at and review some of my own life. You know how there are sometimes that there are people who would have said things in the past, and then as the years roll by, it comes back to haunt them, and they say, well, they're no longer in that particular frame of mind. They don't believe that anymore. They don't think of that anymore. And in a sense, we need to understand where that person is coming from, because that person may have evolved over time and collected more knowledge, more experience, and more memories, and lots of other things have happened in their lives. Life may have happened. When I was a child in New Amsterdam, in Berbice, in Guyana, I often thought that because of my light skin, I was a lot more privileged than everybody else around me. I was adopted into a Black family, and I was treated as the youngest, and I was given everything. I was a strict, disciplined Christian household, but I never wanted for anything. And many others in the extended family looked to me as privileged because I was light-skinned. So there was a certain expectation of me. And I saw myself as being mostly white. I thought of myself as white, and I identified more with white people. And even through primary school and high school in Guyana, and even going to university in Guyana, that kind of myth, that kind of notion was never really dispelled, because there was still this colonialist mentality of looking to white people. Whatever a white person says, that it's God, it's gospel, and therefore they cannot be wrong. But then I came to the United States to further my education. And one of my professors in Black Studies, Black History Studies, a professor named Arthur Lowen, introduced me to Black history. Because even though I did Black history, I did history, Caribbean history and British history in CXC and GCE, it was a history that was written from a white perspective, even though some of the authors were Black. The books were published in the UK. And so it was a Black history, but from a white perspective. So it was not comprehensive. I learned about coffee in Guyana, but I'm just learning more about coffee, one of the who led the 1763, the first slave rebellion in Guyana, in Berbice, and all about what it meant to be Black and from the African diaspora and being enslaved in Guyana. And I came to the United States and I discovered what it really means to be Black. And I will say and argue that I have undergone a significant evolution, a significant transformation in my outlook towards what it means to be Black, what it means for me being Black. So for example, in 2005, this is in 2005, I went for an interview for a position at a magazine on 42nd Street. The day before, I had a really beautiful conversation with this woman. I knew she was white, but she heard my accent. She saw my name. And the conversation was, if she could have hired me there and then, she would have. But I went for the interview in the middle of summer. It was hot, and I'm trying hard not to sweat or show that I'm sweating. And when I pressed the intercom buzzer and I said, I'm here to see so-and-so, my name is Antoine Craigwell. And she came out to this huge glass door and she saw me. I could help, if I could reach through that glass and help pick her face up off the floor, I would have been doing her a really great service. She was shocked to see that I was a Black person. She turned to the white person behind her in another cubicle and said, can you talk to him for me? Because I no longer have time. And she walked away. She gave that position to an Asian from Singapore. That was my first really clear experience of racism in the United States and how little Black people matter to white people. I worked previously in Jive Records, the home of R. Kelly, Britney Spears, Tribe Called Quest,
Alicia
Joe,
yeah.
and all of these.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked there, and the person who owned Jive Records was Zomba Recording Corporation, which was the overall company, was a white South African. His chief financial officer was also a white man who very often would make comments to me that I reminded him of a subway rat because of my color. Okay? But I couldn't object because I needed a job. I couldn't say anything because he would fire me without a moment's notice. And I needed that job to pay my rent. I needed the health insurance. And this was in between 1995 to 98 to 99 for 4 years. So I've experienced racism up close and personal. I've never had an experience of racism in Guyana. I've been protected against it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that kind of like, so in a sense, I have evolved to where I am today.
Right.
And interestingly enough, I just changed my name to accept and include my original name before I was adopted, which is Dutch. So there was a white plantation owner who supposedly sexually abused my mother, my grandmother.
Mm.
And so my mother was born out of that abuse. He supposedly raped my grandmother.
Okay.
And so when we talk about, and I know at some point later on in the questions, we'll talk about how we are affected by traumas and intergenerational traumas and so forth.
Right.
And so I've taken on my grandfather's name, family name, which has roots back in the Netherlands,
okay,
as a way to positivize, to transform that whole experience. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I'm hearing you. I understand. I understand. I want to because I wanted to touch on something that you said also, Antoine, along the lines of colorism, right? I want to bring this question over to Zoe. Zoe, give us your Trinidadian aspect on this. And the reason why I'm doing this, you and Antoine, of course, share the same complexion, right? In terms of just that look of like one of the things I learned here because
So I whiter than her.
Well, yes, yes. No, and I want the audience to get this. He can claim that because Zoe just came up from the islands, right? Anton has been here for years, so of course he pales as soon as the temperature dropped to 10 degrees. So we get it.
Hang on to you. I just got back from Guyana.
Oh, really?
So I've got a little bit of a tan going on.
Just a little bit. That makes
but watch this. Even in Guyana with a tan, I still look white.
Okay, we get it, Antoine. We get it. But I want to bring the question to Zoe along those lines of colorism. What was your experience like, Zoe, growing up? Because, like I said, you share similar complexion to Antoine. And one of the things I learned here coming to America, because Antoine just mentioned it about racism, never experienced that in Jamaica, not one bit. It was more so classism and rich versus poor and privilege versus underprivileged and the persons who had access versus the disenfranchised, right? All this notion of you look at me and I'm a problem because of my skin color. That came to light in 2005, my first full year living here. So I wanted you to speak on your experience about that and just educate us a bit because we want to hear your perspective. Is what we're trying to say.
Yeah, I don't know how I reach in this light skin, but what part of me light skin? I don't know anything about light or skin. No, I mean, of course, growing up in Trinidad, Trinidad has this very robust culture of naming skin color, but we name it in such a way that is not only comical, not only exacerbative, but just on the head, So I remember growing up, one of my grandfather's friends was called Blues. And when you asked why, Granddad, why you all call this man Blues? And the joke was he was so black that he was blue. And so much so that there was somebody in my class in high school that the same name kind of found itself to him. We used to call him Blues because, his skin, his blackness was so rich that we kind of found it beyond the black. And in Trinidad, I'm considered red. So, and there are all these tropes about red man and red woman, and a red woman will be the death of you. And it's interesting because so I will say in acknowledging the reality, I do acknowledge the reality that growing up in Trinidad, especially growing up red skin, light skin, and kind of even in the circles that I was in, even though I went to a public high school, I think even within those, there was an insulation of differentiation in race. You don't necessarily grow up with this awareness of blackness. You grow up with the awareness of Caribbeanness, of course, because that's who we are, and it all kind of comes together in one. But my blackness, kind of, and that even just that definition of identity strictly came into focus when I moved to the US at 17 years old and started acting school. And in acting school, when they were looking for roles for me, it would all be all these African. I mean, the first role was from Fences, and it was like, just black Southern, roles. And at the time, my professors, even in their selection of scenes for me and whatnot, would look for black, and I just remember being so confused. And I remember even naively, now as I told you, I moved to New York at 17, and even naively at the time I would say, well, I'm not black, I'm Caribbean. And I think at that time it was my understanding of the difference between Black American and being from the Caribbean. And even then it still was not a denial of my African heritage or roots, because I know where I came from. But I also knew that, my father was Black, my mother was Indian, and so even that for me brought a kind of richness and also that growing up in the Caribbean, we live beyond the bounds of Blackness being confined to Africanness only. So I think that the conversation is very, very valid. I think as time has gone on, when I returned to Trinidad at about 21 and I started doing a lot of work with Tricanal, that's when I came into such a tactile contact with specifically African culture and the direct inheritance of African culture into Caribbean culture. So I hope I answered your question. And even to say, even now, it's such a privilege to own. It's come more into, I consider it my privilege and a joy to own Blackness, because even growing up as a red person, sometimes there's a differentiation, and you may not necessarily be always allowed to fall in the Blackness, but that has changed and developed so much. So that's my answer to that.
Exactly. And I wanted to thank you and Antoine for just chiming in along those lines of colorism, because it's one of those constructs that we realize that the oppressors from way back when created, house versus field slaves, light skin versus dark skin, a lot of things, all these verses that has caused a lot of infighting and a lot of segregation along lines, lines that we tried to desegregate years ago with the civil rights movement, right? So I thank you all for chiming in with those input, because it's absolutely necessary to keep that conversation going and to see how we can stand better united as against being divided and being separated by these, what I call silly notions, right? Because when you, like I said, when people see us, all of us on this call, we're all Black until we open our mouth and start talking. And then we're like, oh, so where you from, right? Then the conversation goes on from there. Right. So, Stephanie, can you talk about the ways in which moving to the States impacted your understanding of yourself as a Black person?
Okay, moving to the state was a huge difference for me, because being in the Caribbean, you treated equally the color of your skin. But moving here to the States, your skin color is like when you're Black, it's a total different thing. I remember I took the Long Island Railway to to the city, and the white person on the train that cut the ticket, I didn't realize I bought the wrong ticket, and she gave me a fine. And then a man on the second stop jumped on the train with no ticket, and she gave him the leeway to go away. Say, okay, you can take the train to the next stop. I'll give you a chance. But with me, she gave me a fine. So moving here to the state, I realized that the color of your skin make a huge difference, and also where you're from. People treat you different in the workplace. All the Black folks do the low job, and all the white folks are sitting in the office. So that made me feel uncomfortable in a lot of area. But being in Caribbean Equality, speaking to Theo, being around people with the color of my skin makes me feel comfortable. So I no longer, last year, I've kind of felt like I'm out of place because of the color of my skin, but no, I don't no longer felt that way. So I just try to relax and enjoy. Caribbean Equality has been a huge support to me, and be around people who love to be around Black people. So moving here for me was like a huge eye opener for the color of my skin.
Right. And that's what you call, my dear, a culture shock, right? When you move from a place where you're quite familiar with and just being raised in, and, it's a culture shock for us because of the difference in, the cultural practices here, laws and rules and regulations, this versus that, and also the either the subtle racism, the overt racism, and everything we had to learn about these racist constructs that we're working as an organization, as well as the other organizations being represented by the persons on this call, right? That we're all actively working to dismantle and deconstruct, those oppressive tropes and everything that continue to suppress the Black, or try to suppress the race, the voice system, all right? So Harry, I wanted to ask you before we move to the next segment, what ultimately brought you to the community work? You gave us the background as to, what spurred you, what ignited, what that kind of gave you the pilot light. It lighted a little pilot light for you in your formative years. What brought you to this work as a young adult and now as a grown man?
Yeah, thanks again. In the early 90s, it was, to me, a call to action. It was a start towards the AIDS crisis, the AIDS epidemic, somewhat in the early 90s. And this friend of mine actually from my hometown, much older guy. He passed on, he died of AIDS, and he has family that lives in New York. And one of the thing, when folks died back in the with AIDS back in the early 90s, the funeral home or the family wouldn't go and claim the body, and pretty much sometimes they end up in Potter's Field. So a friend of my cousin was working in this funeral home, and he said the body, the person, he died at Bellevue, so the body went to up in the Bronx, and I was able to organize his funeral and went over, asked a couple of friends, we do collect some collection, and we were able to have a very meaningful funeral. Luckily, his family in the end, they came to support, but if it was for my effort, his body would be in Potter's Field. So it was a dark time, where the act up the demonstration for the medication for AIDS and HIV. I was at St. John the Divine. We organized they were part of the AIDS walk. So I was in the church, so I actually went to the AIDS walk initially. But to see folks who were dying and the loved one was just totally abandoned them. I also remember one time that I went to a friend of mine who was matter of fact one of a priest from a different church, but he was at my church. He got sick in St. Vincent's Hospital. He's still in Chelsea. And I went to visit him, and the nurse, I think it was the Caribbean nurse, I didn't know about putting on a mask, whatever. She said, "What are you doing here? You should put on a mask and a gown." And I said to her, "He's my friend. I just came to visit him." And I felt that it was anything was gonna happen. And I was really shocked. I was traumatized the way the nurse approached me, but that was what the normalcy was back then. So seeing the struggle, seeing stigma, seeing how people died without some form of recognition and compassion, I think that was one to say, well, if these people are dying and their loved one is abandoning them, we need to have community. So I remember at the center, there used to be these community groups. I remember GMAD started there, an organization. So, but at the same time, I was, still seeing what was going on in the struggle for, especially the people of color. With the Black churches and family people of color who were affected by AIDS were just pretty much kicked out or abandoned. And I think that was something that I said, you know what, I would love to do something. And I think maybe the first time bury my friend was what ultimately led me into where I'm at right now. Because if you don't have voices, if you don't have support, who is it going to be there? And I think looking back at the work that Caribbean Equality is doing, that is a testament of what community works looks like and community organization looks like. So I'm glad that I'm in a place that is making changes, agent of change, and have folks who look like me are making difference. Because let me tell you, there's a lot of young people who are living on the streets of New York City, homelessness, but you can't see, and being kicked out from their family because of how they see themselves. So I think being in the field and working with community organization, being an advocate and organizer, I think that's where I see I'm making a difference in the life of young people.
Exactly. And thank you for that. I wanted to mention something. As you said at the end, Harry, we heard it in the impact of the social justice work that CEP does. Show me what community looks like, right? This is what community looks like. And I wanted to mention something real tangential, just real quickly. It was having a conversation with you, because you and your group that you associate with, right? Just age-wise, they're your contemporaries, right? You're men of a particular age for the most part. And it was having a conversation with y'all in conjunction with watching Pose, where I learned so much about how HIV/AIDS really impacted persons. It was one thing to read it and to watch all the videos and the movies associated with it, but just to hear the real underground experience with persons who lived through that epidemic, right? And are still living through it, to this very day. Let's not forget that part. And it's just like, it was real eye opening just to hear those first hand experiences and just comparing them to what we watched on Pose, right? When during Pose's run last year and the year before that. So thank you for that. Thank you for that input right there. And I wanted to get this question in as well. And folks who are watching us, please continue to submit your questions. We have a section and segment just for y'all. So please continue to submit everything that you want to ask our panelists. I'm seeing folks saying that you love this. So please continue to show your love by asking us, some questions. After the brutal lynching of George Floyd, to my panelists, right? In the year 2020, that changed everything. That literally changed the game. The conversations that we have always been having about anti-black racism and the many ways that it can manifest, right? We saw those come to the forefront. Specifically focusing on the US, can you talk about how white supremacy, the criminal justice system, or immigration system, the depiction of black people in mass media and the entertainment industry, or any other factor in American life, how that endangers the future of black people and how do we confront these issues, right? So this goes focusing on the whole like eruption of social justice and racial justice work in America since the lynching of George Floyd in May 2020. How do we can we just talk about everything that's happened with that occurrence? Antoine, I'll let you go first, and then we'll take one of the ladies right after you.
Thanks, Theo. One of the things that I reflect on when I read that question, and I've been thinking about it a lot since the George Floyd's murder in May of 2020, is that what George Floyd's death did is affirmed and confirmed for Black people across the United States and the world that if it wasn't for a video, even though we had Rodney King's video, if it wasn't for a video, we wouldn't have seen his murder take place live and direct. We wouldn't have seen the life ebbing out of him because it was symbolic. The actual act of a white man's knee on a Black man's neck as his life was ebbing out of his body is symbolic of exactly what the white community is doing to Black people currently. But the uprising that has erupted as a result of George Floyd was a way that a Black community in the United States and around the world, because if you remember, there were massive protests in cities around the world, in Europe, across England, across France, in Germany, all over. But I think what was significant about this time is that the white community are now being held to ransom. They are now being held up and being held and said, you now have to account for this.
Yes.
But I am sitting in many different fora with white people. So you guys, some of you guys may know that I sit on an advisory board to the Commissioner of Mental Health for New York State. I was just elected as co-chair for that commission, for that council. And I'm on a number of other different communities. And so just last Friday, I was part of an advisory board for Black youth suicide prevention that is hosted by the Office of Mental Health in New York State. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking, there were 3 Black people. The rest of them are all middle-aged or middle-aged white people. And I asked the question, the commissioner was there, and I asked the question, how can we be sitting here talking about Black youth suicide when you do not have any Black youth represented on this panel? When you don't have a Black LGBT person on this panel? And I referred to the Trevor Project's data that says Black LGBT attempt suicide 6 times more than their white counterpart and heterosexual counterpart. And how could you have a talking about? And so my point was with that is to suggest that I think the white community is literally holding their breath. They are waiting for all the hoopla to die down. Let us flood the Black community with some entertainment and some distraction and some scandal to occupy their minds. because Black people have simple minds. They cannot think constructively. They cannot think beyond the next event. Let's provide them with some distraction, and we will then regain control and continue to do and get back to where we were before George Floyd interrupted us. Before George Floyd's death so inconveniently interrupted us, and we will get back to normal. Because I think the white community in the United States, as well as in England, because we've had instances of that following George Floyd, you have the Windrush scandal that erupted in England. You've had Black and North Africans who are also facing persecution in Italy and France and in Germany. So that's a whole other conversation about how Black people are moving from the global South into the global North as a way to reclaim some of the economic value that was taken from them, that dispossessed them and dispossessed their economies and their countries. But what I'm saying is that the white community is patiently waiting for Black people to be sufficiently distracted. So let's talk about the NFL. Let's talk about Super Bowl that we just had on Sunday.
Let's keep Kanye. Let's keep Kanye in the hot topics, which he seems to dominate as a true narcissist, right?
But Kanye is an apologist for the white community because he has lost his identity.
Kanye
he needs to and we understood from a few years ago that Kanye publicly admitted that he's struggling with mental health. So who's to say that all his iterations and all his utterances and so forth is some manifestation of some mental health issue that he's dealing with?
Exactly.
That is fundamentally about his sense of self, his sense of identity, his sense of purpose. But what I'm saying is that the white community is patiently waiting until Black people can be sufficiently distracted and they will regain control and say, well, okay, so now let's go back to the way things were. Not just pre-pandemic, but pre-George Floyd. And what we have to do as Black people today is say, it's not going to go back to life as normal, where white people are constantly in control and running stuff. We now have to tell white people, you do not get to dictate for us. And I'm talking about white people who also see themselves as our allies. Because white people who see themselves as allies are exercising a version of privilege. Because we can have a conversation any which way about our Black community members who are associated with white people as partners, as husbands, as wives, whatever. Because if the police get called, who gets removed from the house?
They're going to target the Black person first.
If there's a traffic stop, who gets asked to step out of the car? Okay, so let's also consider that disproportionately as well, Black women are afraid to get pregnant. Young Black women are terrified of becoming pregnant. Why? Because the rates of Black women dying in childbirth are higher than white women. They do not get sufficient prenatal care and postnatal care, as well as maternal care during delivery.
Exactly. With regards to some of the points that you made, Antoine, very valid points indeed. I wanted to get Stephanie's input on this as well, and take on this matter as well. Stephanie, the impact with George Floyd's lynching, and how are we imagining a new future without going back to normal? Because it's like Antoine was saying just now, your timeline is going back to normal. Start shaking the table again. Because it can't, and we've seen several other cases of police brutality of Black men since before, during, and after George Floyd has died, all the way right now into 2022. There's a case in California, and there's another case in the Midwest, right there in Minnesota, right? So, Stephanie, what's your take on this, my dear?
It's still happening. We Black people will never get the chance to live free and be free unless we unite together and come together and let white folks know that we exist and we have the power and the knowledge to do the same as white folks. George Floyd death took a toll on me, the younger generation, the older generation. Today when it happened, I could not believe what happened. For weeks, for days, I still could not believe. And everything now happened with George Floyd is still happening in different states, in different countries, especially here in the United States. When the black cop pull you over and the white cop is there, the white cop always wants to interrogate the black folks, try to make you look like you do something wrong. So it will never stop unless black people come together and unite together and let them know that we have the power and the knowledge and they should stop.
Indeed, and if it's often said as well, if we move collectively together as a people, as persons of color, as black people specifically, like we did when we were doing the electric slide and the Cupid shuffle, oh, what an impact we could have as a collective unit, right? The Zoe, what do you say to this, my dear?
Yeah, I think that this case, the lynching of George Floyd in particular, I guess the perspective on it that I want to provide is I was in Trinidad at the time, and to talk about how the ripple and the roar spread all the way to Trinidad and erupted we had our own demonstrations in Trinidad that were focused on the Black Lives Matter movement. And, all these questions came up in this Caribbean context of, well, when you say in a Caribbean context, Black Lives Matter, what does that mean? Who are you advocating for, and who are you singling out? Who are you differentiating against? Because our white Caribbean people, the oppressors within Caribbean context. And, I think that even just those conversations were so important to be had. And the fact that in today's day, especially because of the prominence of media, not just social media, but media and the way that media spreads, George Floyd has had an impact rightfully around the entire world. And yeah, my hope is that the ripple continues, and that it doesn't just become a passing cloud, waiting for the next crippling lynching to be witnessed again. And I think that's the point at which we have to ask, yeah, there's an uproar and whoever stormed the Capitol, whenever, but where are we now, and on a systematic level, I think that's also an aspect of the conversation that I find important. And it was part of the conversation that we were having in Trinidad is, the Caribbean society is so much smaller. Yes, it might be easy to look at your white counterparts and cast blame on them as individuals, but the truth of the matter is that it's systemic, and the change needs to happen definitely on a systemic level. It's instead of just picking at the low-hanging fruit that might in fact do us more harm than long-term good.
And long-term good and everything. I like what you said, Zoe, definitely tying into the point that's being made by the other panelists and everything. And to bring into all of these points, they have enriched this conversation thus far into tonight's proceedings, right? With an audience question, I want to take that and make sure we acknowledge our audience. Keep sending your questions in to us. What is the relationship that Caribbean people in particular have with Black joy, right? That has enriched the whole Black diaspora, which is what we're living in, right? And it's on social media being posted by Darren. What is the relationship that Caribbean people in particular have with Black joy that has enriched the whole Black diaspora? And, what is the importance of Black joy to Black livelihood? And what is the relationship between Black joy and the future of Black people in this hemisphere? So all of this is tying into Black joy. We heard of Black girl magic, hashtag Black girl magic, and we heard of hashtag Black boy joy. Harry, how is this tying into creating this future that we're having this discussion about on this live tonight? Finding that joy and that peace. So I wanted you to take this from this clinical social worker perspective.
Is it towards the first question that you asked us? So is it towards responding to the comment from Antoine, their first question?
No, this is a brand new question from the audience in general, right? What is the relationship that Caribbean people in particular have with Black joy that has enriched the whole Black diaspora?
Well, from Caribbean, the Caribbean diaspora has been around, has been making changes, especially with social media I mean, they're making impact into the community. I mean, you could look at in September Caribbean Carnival. We could look at folks in power, folks in making decision in city government, in state government, in federal government that are making a difference. That joy, that changing laws. A lot of folks are not knowing some of these laws or these decisions as Caribbean at the forefront or part of it. We're making these changes, but especially the young generation of Caribbean folks who are there making a difference, doing, looking, especially I live in Brooklyn and I could see when you go in Flatbush, you are seeing changes. Folks are fighting for tenants' rights, the pandemic, the food insecurity. We're making a difference. The relation of Black joy that we're celebrating ourselves for our bodies. We're making a difference within the pathology of what's going on. That we are there. We are at the forefront of things. We may not identify as Caribbean, but we are making a big changes, and especially in New York City, and I could say Atlanta and Miami, Florida, that where changes are there. The diaspora is very significant in the United States and also in the various different Caribbean islands where they're impacting their government to make changes. I could look at laws didn't change in Trinidad with regard to the Buggery law. That has to do with some support from the diaspora.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I want to mention, kind of in response to Darren's question, it's so interesting, the relationship, and the topic of Black joy, especially Black joy as a tool of enriching the entire Black diaspora. And I think if we look at Carnival, not just as ritual, but, if we look at the kind of cultural and historical roots of Carnival, and Carnival being a tool of resistance, and it's actually the ritualistic embodiment of joy as resistance. How much enrichment could we even begin to glean from that? Because, and now we see so as you said, Theo, you see the hashtag Black Girl Magic, Black Boy Joy. But I think beyond these hashtags, that has definitely been an active form of resistance. Is people in the Black diaspora choosing that their form of resistance will be leaning into joy, and not just leaning into it, but expressing it and engaging it in a way that is so undeniable. Because we understand joy to be a force of life, right? And we understand that in displaying and in living in our joy and in our color. And we could look at the pride movements and the movements of pride marches and pride celebrations around the world as also exactly that, choosing joy as a form of resistance. Right. So even if we look at TikTok, there have been these protests by the Black creators choosing to withdraw their hand from TikTok because they understand that the inherent richness of Black culture is such that these little kids around not just America but around the world that have come from Blackness would just put a little dance out on TikTok and it hits, it's viral, and then it's overtaken by non-Black content creators, and they are given a platform, and therein is another issue. But speaking about Black joy as definitely a form of resistance, and the myriad ways in which we see it being expressed and used as resistance, I think is continuously reflected in our enrichment from that. As Black people.
Thank you for that. Small point, just to piggyback on what Zoe said.
Go ahead.
Yeah, when I just mentioned, when you look at the big truck at Pride, you remember when they have the Grammy Award, when they have the Reggae Night, that is Black joy. And the different festival, what Caribbean culture is actually entwined in the American culture. So that's joy. To see when Brooklyn Pride, Caribbean Equality took over the whole space, and folks was like, wow. To me, that was Black joy. Right there.
There you go. Thanks for bringing up that memory, Harry. For those who need a specific reference to that, to what Harry just mentioned, and what Zoe and everybody else has mentioned about that finding that joy, specifically what Harry said, visit our YouTube page at Curb
I
Inequality
can
Project
come
on
back to
YouTube.
that one too.
And, right there,
Yes.
you go.
I mean,
Stephanie?
my first time at Pride, I was like, wow, I heard about Pride for so many years, and I could not actually believe I'm actually standing in Pride. That is Black joy. When is
There,
Pride coming back? We need
there
it
you
back.
go. We're working on it. This pandemic has to abate somewhat more, somewhat as we go along with the year, and we'll definitely, it's a touch and go process as we are working on that. But definitely,
The
go
different
ahead.
colors, the food, the culture, the different people. Pride
Mhm.
was one of the most joyful event that Black people could ever have. And sometimes I feel like it's been taken away from us, but
Because of the pandemic, right?
because of the
Right,
pandemic.
right.
But Pride,
Definitely.
Black, that is my Black joy. Pride.
There you go. Viva la Pride, right? We want for folks who want a specific reenactment or just a refresher about what our panelists are talking about. Please visit Curb Inequality Project's YouTube page. Some of y'all are viewing the live right now from that. And look at our videos in our archive, right? You'll see the World Pride 2019 World Pride Big Truck recap video. Can't miss it. We've used it several times since then, since creating that image. Stephanie, I wanted to tag along with something for you real quickly because we did promise we'd get to this. You have a beautiful and incredibly intelligent daughter who is a young Black girl in this country. So this topic of imagining the Black future must hit differently for you as a mother and raising. I want to say preteen, right? Preteen, right?
Yes, she
There
will
you
be
go.
12 in May.
See what I'm saying? Real preteen. That's how long I have not seen your daughter in person. That it's been so long. But what are your hopes and dreams for her? And do you think her being Black may be an obstacle for her? Or do you imagine it won't be? So, do you think this Black skin of hers is going to hinder her or not? How is this future looking for her from your perspective as her mom?
Well, she's doing well in school. She's clocking the hundreds in the 90s, so that's good. Well, my dream for her is make sure that she gets a good education. And what I want to see happen for most black young generation is that we need to make sure we're educating them more. We need more opportunities in the school. We need more Black sports in the school. We need to give the black kids more opportunity, give them better jobs. Because I remember she came home with a paper, and the paper had different type of careers on it. And on the particular paper, I did not see lawyers, I did not see doctors, I saw teachers, I saw entrepreneurs, I saw nurses, but all the top jobs weren't on that list. And that's what we need to enforce more into the Black school and the Black societies for the younger generation. It's more opportunities and more education.
Good. Do you see? I wanted to reiterate something about the question for you. Do you see, her Blackness being a young Black princess? Do you see that, kind of impacting her anyway? Do you see foresee any obstacles in her future?
No, because if I educate her the right way, she will be fine. And that's the power, or education. It will take her a long way.
Good. All right. We can live with that. We're gonna live with that, definitely. Zoe, who do you see as a contemporary leader in Black imagination? And are there any Black queer Caribbean people that you see as contemporary leaders in Black imagination?
Such a loaded question. There's so much coming out of the Caribbean now. I did want to turn this over to Jamaica, though. I find that what's happening with the movement of reggae in Jamaica, and the way that Jamaican artists are taking themselves and their music and their culture so seriously is so inspiring. Recently, somebody who made me so proud was Lila Ike. Lila Ike came out on the Protege's record label, and she made her waves, and she recently came out as a lesbian. Actually, I'm not sure if she came out herself or if she was outed, but she definitely embraced the public knowledge. And I think this is such a dynamic, an important, crucial time and movement forward. As we know, Jamaica in particular has a unique historical struggle with the culture clash between reggae culture and LGBT culture. And there have been moments of redemption since then by very, very popular reggae artists that have, made apologies for their statements in their music in the past. But moving beyond that and moving into the future to see a child of reggae herself, claim her artistic identity and also claim her sexuality is so empowering and so hopeful. And so, there's so many that we could look at and speak on. But when I saw this question, the first thing that really came to me was, Jamaican reggae music, and more specifically, Lila Ike and her embracing of her queer identity.
Good, 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 good. Thank you for that. Thank you for that response, Zoe. Thank you. Harry, I wanted to turn the mic over to you real quickly and ask you this question. What kind of future are you imagining for younger Black people of all sexualities? And what excites you the most and why? Or is there anything that worries you? All right. So what's this future looking like for the younger generation that I know you mentor for a fact that you mentor, right? Like I said, on a personal note, conversations that we have had, the younger people that you're mentoring through Men of Faith, through your profession that you clock into and clock out of daily, and just in your life in general, what's that future looking like for people, Black people of all sexualities, and how does that excite you and why? And are there any worries for you?
I know Stephanie mentioned education. Education, I mean, on this panel, I see Black, gifted, educated panelists. I think one of the things we need is to have more of our people gaining professional credential, gaining education, or somewhat. That's the only way we're going to make waves in these spaces. I know the ballroom community have some form of education initiative where they're encouraging folks to go back to school, get a trade, get a degree, get a something. I've been mentoring 5 young men, and one of the things I want to show them that without education, you're nothing. To fight homelessness and to fight poverty, you got to have some form of education. And I think with social media, it's actually amplifying folks to really gain these spaces or getting education and getting somewhere. So what excites me is that there's a future, there is a green light that the young people are mentoring, are reaching out to with their peers to make a difference. I like the collaboration when I do with Men of Faith and Caribbean Equality that we could partnership. Also, with partnership with New York Community for Change, which is a grassroots organization made mainly of Caribbean folks, and to have Caribbean Equality show up, and folks know what Caribbean Equality is. At first, folks up there was kind of like, but when the education and the understanding that they realize that Caribbean Equality is helping community, is about community, and if we're part of community, we have to have collaboration. What hurts me most is when we having these, like tonight, you're appealing to folks to make contribution that will spend our money in Santo Domingo in spending money on sex exploitation, but will never give Caribbean Equality at least $10. I've known folks who, when I say we're having this fundraising to make difference, their mind is not there. They will spend their money somewhere else. At the same time, who are defending, who are going on the front line to fight for causes that's going to affect Black, gay men, and queer folks. And I think it's time for folks to start to realize the importance of community organization who are fighting, who are standing up, who are lobbying with politicians to change laws and policy. And I know Caribbean Equality is doing the work and doing that. I mean, here $70,000 to help out during the pandemic. And it's not only one community, but all the community Caribbean Equality was doing. And I wish more folks will actually respond and support these organizations. We're not just doing it because we like doing it, but if we don't do it, who else will do it? We gotta stand with partnership. It's important to do these things. The work needs to be done. And without people like Caribbean Equality and other organizations, the ballroom community, what are we doing? But I can rest assured that with the work that is being done and with more partnership, that's the only way we're going to make a difference.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you, and thank you so much for actually addressing the other part of this that I was gonna ask, which you kind of just went right into it anyways. Nice segue about the food justice work that you've done in partnership with CEP, through Menofit and the New York Communities of Change. Thank you for mentioning that, right? Because those donations, as you have you said before, right, they are essential to the work that we continue to do to benefit and uplift our communities, because we got to break out of disenfranchisement one day, as long as there's life, right? There's gonna come a day when we have equality, and equality for all and not just some, right? And how we can use this money and make sure it circulates within our black communities before it goes anywhere else, right? So definitely thank you for that. I thank you for that, and thank you for the partnership for ensuring that our food justice work continues year in, year out, and month in, month out, especially during those seasons where folks are really needing the most help. Thank you for that, and we want to make sure that that partnership continues and stays intact and solid. And last but not least, Mr. Craigwell, we're going to circle back to this question because I wanted you to briefly close us out with your response about the question about Black Joy, and I will reiterate it for those folks who may have missed it. Right? Can you talk about joy and what brings you joy personally, and how has this Black joy enriched the whole diaspora, and what is the importance of connecting that Black joy to Black livelihood? Right? I want you to close us out with that, with your response.
Well, I just remember to take my phone, click the mute button, so I don't have to go through that anymore right now.
And the last, right? For the last question, the last and final question. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was listening to some of the commentary on Black joy. Personally, I have learned over the years to enjoy my solitude, and maybe that might have come from my religious training, because as a former Jesuit, I learned how to live quietly, live by myself, and so celebrate and enjoy my own being by myself. And I enjoy cooking. And as I'm sure that my neighbors really hate when I put on music, because I start singing and I start dancing, and I'd have a variety of music from calypso and soca all the way to Miriam Makeba and some African performers, and Lata Mangeshkar, who, may her soul rest in peace, she just died, to classical music. So I go a whole gamut. But Black joy for me is important because I think as Caribbean people, we have evolved despite the colonial influence, despite the colonial oppression, and created something that is unique to us as Caribbean people. And that is our foods, our dances. Zoe talked about the calypso and the soca. Harry talks about the reggae from Jamaica. We've got the Haitian music. So we have created our own type of joy where we celebrate among ourselves and reinforce our bonds, reconnect with each other. There is nothing better than a couple of Black people sitting down over a pot of cook-up rice and some black rum, some red rum, and we will talk the whole night and talk about everything under the sun. And we will make and break laws right there on that bottom house. There is nothing more joyful and unifying than people gathering and just impromptu having a celebration, which is what we do. But I think that Black joy from the Caribbean coming to the United States is coming up strongly against the American imperialism, against the white colonialism, but it's coming smack up against that. And it's also coming up against Black Americans' perspectives and views about Black Caribbean. It's also coming up smack against Africans out of Africa in the United States who sometimes look at Black Americans and Black Caribbean as not authentically Black. And what we are able to do is to remind them that in our music, in our foods, in our dress, in our dance, in even on our Creole, that we have roots that go all the way back to Africa, that they can identify. So you get together with an African and you start talking about foods, and you start talking about Edo and cassava and yam and tanya, and you start talking about maybe jollof rice. What is the corresponding in the Caribbean? Pilau, cook up. Okay? You start talking about liquor. You start talking about beer and paiwari and indigenous liquors and stuff that we will make and drink. You start talking about dance. Listen to some African music. Listen to some South African music or Nigerian music, and you hear traces of calypso and soca in the rhythm, in the beats. Okay, listen to that, and you can see that there's such a strong connection all the way through, that despite the efforts of the colonialists to oppress us, to stifle us, to wipe us out, to remove us, to erase us, we are still existing. We are like the black version, and nobody take this offensively, but we are like cockroaches. We will survive a nuclear blast. We are always here, and the white community is hell-bent on suppressing us, on keeping us down. That's black joy.
Yes. Yes. What thank you for that impassioned response, Antoine. Because what I'm hearing from the audience as well, because they're chiming in, when our panelists are responding, and they're saying that, listen, we need a whole culinary session with you. We need a whole history lesson. If you have not, because I need to check this, so correct me if I'm wrong. If you have not released a biography, we need all of that, because I didn't know you were a Jesuit. I went to a Jesuit high school back home, so a Jesuit Catholic high school back home, much similar to Fordham and Georgetown and all those good stuff, right? So we're hearing a lot, and you have the audience salivating both at your response and at the prospect of some good food. So definitely.
Hell no.
What do you mean?
Hell no.
You're not cooking for anybody, Antoine?
Nope. Actually, I have to cook this week, so I'm hungry because I just got back from Guyana and I haven't any cooked food in the house, so I have to cook. And when I'm done here, I'm going to eat some mango and pernil with cebolla.
Not you having the whole pork shoulder and everything else, and then you're not going to cook for us, Antoine. In what universe are we existing? Well, Antoine, you need to spread that black boy joy to the universe, and that encapsulates.
Well, we're in COVID, Theo, so nobody's coming to my house.
Listen, you and Stephanie and Harry, because I know Harry can cook too. Well, yes, I believe Harry can cook too. Harry will get back to you. But
hang on. Did you see that question?
I see it.
Who do you think are the great Guyanese intellectuals who are writing about the country or the Caribbean region? Walter Rodney, U.C. Quayana, Martin Carter, A.J. Seymour. Then I can jump to Eric Williams from Trinidad. Okay. There is there's an economist and in Guyana. I'm blanking on his name, a prominent Guyanese economist who has gotten into a lot of trouble about questioning Guyana's adherence and Guyana's government's kind of like slavish attention to Western European and American financial instruments like the IMF and the World Bank, the IADB, the Pan-African, the OAS and all of that. But just right off the bat. But also, there is a prominent Guyanese author who many people may not have heard about. And this is a man who has Dutch, German heritage, who in 15 years wrote 14 books about Guyanese. And his name is Edgar Mettelholzer. And one of his books was called My Bones and My Flute, which was serialized on Guyanese radios in the 1970s. Edgar Mettelholzer was from the Corentyne Berbice area, and he wrote about, kind of fictionalized, but in a sense, describing Guyanese life. He wrote these 14 books and was never published, could never get a white publisher to publish his books. He went to Great Britain, to London, seeking a publisher, and in frustration, desperation, and massive amounts of depression, set himself afire on the streets of London, killed himself by self-immolation.
Mm.
So there is the work of Edgar Metal-Halser. A lot of his books right now are out of print because they are so, people are not really reading Edgar Metal-Halser, but it's a series that would be worthwhile collecting and gathering. But there's, like I said, Walter Rodney, U.C. Quayana, who actually is still alive. There is actually one of the greatest anthropologists that the Black community has ever seen, who was Guyanese, is Ivan van Sertima.
Mm-hmm.
Ivan van Sertima has written one of the preeminent books on Black anthropology, including talking about Black Africans in Central America about 2,000 years before Columbus arrived in the so-called New World.
Right.
That the Blacks from some West Africa arrived in Central America and taught the ancestors of the Aztecs how to farm, who were the Toltec people in Central America.
Mm-hmm.
So Ivan van Sertima is another example of a Guyanese intellectual.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you for answering that. And thank you, Sai, for posing that question. We have time now for one more audience question before we have closing remarks from each panelist. So we have one more audience question coming up. One more audience question here. Thank you. For Zoe specifically, how do we call on allies and non-Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and other queer community members to support and protect Black trans women? Right? And that question is pinned right for our audience and our panelists' viewing pleasure, specifically directed to Zoe from Mohammed. Go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, Mohammed, thank you so much for bringing this to the table. The rate of homicide for Black trans women is astronomical, and it's unfortunate because it continues, and it hasn't ceased over the years. So right now, it's Black trans women have become, even tokenized in a way for allied communities, especially non-Black LGBT people. We've become tokenized as a way to show visible support through hashtags, through economic donations, even. But I think the creation of space, and not just the creation of space and safe space, but permission of space, I think a way that, trans people feel most safe and most validated in their existence is through spaces, finding spaces in which we can exist unpoliced, with each other, amongst each other, not even tokenized amongst other LGBT people, but support in that way, and also support in the way of drawing close, drawing near, not in a public, visible kind of platform-based way, but drawing close to us on an individual level, making friends and getting to know Black trans people, and not just getting to know them for trauma mining, but getting to know them for their joys, and finding ways in which you could, as an individual, add to the joy of a Black trans woman. And that's part of what I mean by creating safe space, is through community, but community through intimacy, right? Community through the intimate acts of, drawing close to find out, just on a private individual level, how can I support you? What are you going through that you may need another voice to get you access to, or to support, in so many different ways, from housing. I myself have been repeat, just on the experience of how hard it is to find safe and accepted housing as a Black trans woman, and feeling like you constantly need to announce this aspect of your identity, even to queer spaces. and then to navigate what comes thereafter, which usually is not just acceptance, is not just space. So I think, as I said, community through intimacy, that is one of the ways in which I would answer that question, as to calling on our allies and our non-Black LGBT and queer community members to support and protect, especially protection of Black trans women. Community through intimacy.
There you go. Wiser words could not be spoken by one of our panelists. You've heard it here. You've heard it here first from Zoe Sazzle herself. We are wrapping up tonight's programming, and we cannot do so, though, without thanking each and every one of our panelists. And what we want to do is to hear from them one last time with their closing remarks as we bring tonight to a close. So I'd like to start with Stephanie. Go ahead, my dear, with your closing remarks, and of course, bigging up yourself.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, Capital Equality, for letting me be a part of this program. I really enjoyed it, and continue to do the work that you're doing to help others to be safe and move forward to live a better life as a gay and trans people. Thank you.
All right. Next up, we want to hear from Antoine. Your closing remarks, my good man.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Theo, for moderating this panel. And it's good to see Harry again. And last time I saw him was at Shane's book launch. Zoe, it's good to see you again. The last time I saw you was last year when we did the Global South event, and you were part of that panel. Stephanie, it's a pleasure meeting you for the first time. I hope this would not be the last time I'm seeing or hearing from you. And I've been looking at some of the comments and questions in the Facebook chat for this event. And I'm interested in a lot of those comments and questions that are being raised. And I think that this is an important conversation. I think there are a lot more that we can talk about. There's a lot more that we need to address. A lot more we need to bring up and have open, honest conversations about. I think very often we are afraid to face some of these truths. And even in our own communities, in LGBT people of color communities, there are truths that we need to face. And one of the things that I got a sense during the entire evening, and I'm reminded of this book that I've just finished reading about the Berbice Slave Rebellion. And it mentions that, in fact, as a Black people, we don't all hold one head. We all have different perspectives, different viewpoints, and sometimes they go in divergent fashion. They go in opposite ways. And so perhaps we need now to look at a way that we can bring some of the commonalities together in a form of unity, especially in Black and people of color communities.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those points. Very wisely said. Harry, I'm going to let you take the mic. We're Jamaican brethren. Lead us out on some good points.
Yeah, and just thank you once again, Caribbean Equality, for opening up this space, this platform for us to learn from each other, to lift you up for the work you've been doing, a great work for the last 7 years. The people, more flowers to you and Mohammed and Darren and the rest of the crew of Caribbean Equality. One of the things that I know, just to piggyback on what Zoe said, we need allies. We also need gatekeepers. And when I say gatekeepers, we need people who are actually in spaces where you're confronted with a situation where you could jump in. I use an example where, as someone, trans people struggle with substance abuse also. But when they come into our unit, being hospitalized, and they face with another from the nurses staff and the other staff who's not educated in trans life or whatever, folks who are in space like that needs to be the gatekeeper, needs to be the agent of change. And I actually do it at my job, and actually run workshop to educate, because we have folks who work from different cultures and doesn't understand what it means to be trans. We need mentors, and mentors is not going to exploit folks. We need folks to be mentoring of folks who looks like them, or folks who are struggling with homelessness and abandonment issue. The only way we're going to do that is being there for folks, providing them with opportunity to go to take the next level. We need platform like these to inform the public of what is happening in the community. We also need money. We need funders. We need money to move organization like Caribbean Equality, Men of Faith, New York Community for Change, just be the voice of the voiceless, the marginalized. So until we get all these collaboration, that's the only way we're going to make change. We're going to make difference, because there are folks there who right now on the streets, on the train, who tomorrow may wake up without somewhere a roof over their head. We have to be there. Mental health is real. Homelessness is real. Trans life is real. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Harry. Wise words from all of our panelists and everything that's been said. Ms. Sazzle, I have not forgotten about you, but you're going to give me 1 quick minute. I'll let you close us out all together, right? As you have the last of the night anyways. So I'm going to, with that being said, I just want to quickly, of course, embrace everyone that was a part of this live tonight. Thank you, first and foremost, to our audience. Y'all have made this definitely a good experience for myself as the moderator / host, and for the panelists that are here talking tonight. For all 4 panelists that are that have spoken and given a part of their, of course, a chunk of their time for this evening. There could have been a ton of things you could have been doing on, the day after Valentine's Day, during Black History and History Month, and you dedicate that Tuesday to Caribbean Equality Project's work. Thank you for that. Each of your points, each of your lives are valid. I know I learned so much about everything, that and just different things about persons on this live that I didn't know, and it's so interesting. You think after all these years of some of the folks on this live being featured in CEP's work, you think you know a person, but you learn so many new things when you have these conversations and you engage persons. So I just want to thank our panelists, and thanks also to all of our organizers behind the scenes. We want to big up the World is Rich Productions, which is going to lead us out into the item that Zoe has to introduce, right? I want to thank, of course, Darren J. Glenn. I'm going to bring him up as well in terms of featuring his night, which is coming up on Thursday, February 17th, 2022, right back here on Facebook Live and via YouTube. We're going to have night 2, where we're going to be centering queer Black artists and creatives as a continuation of our of our Black Future Tings. All right, where we're going to be centering queer Black Caribbean immigrant futurism right here again on Thursday night, just a day from now. Mark your calendars, put a pin where you need to put it, and carve out that space just for CEP once more, because we'd love to see you, virtually, digitally, and everything, and have that space held just for you to come participate with us and our 4 panelists that will be leading the conversation that night. At the helm being Darren J. Glenn, or host and moderator for that night, one of CEP's leaders. So thank you all so much for coming on for that. Please reshare, like, subscribe to our social media platforms here at Caribbean Equality Project. And, of course, just as Harry just reminded us, continue with those contributions, continue with those donations. We need the support to continue our work, right? And just continue with the donations and everything. And of course, thank Mohammed Q. Amin for helping us to, as the executive director and founder, for helping us to curate tonight's proceedings. We couldn't have done it without his wise leadership, as per usual. And with that being said, I'm going to let Zoe have her closing moment, of course, to give her final thoughts and lead us into the last aspect of tonight's proceedings. Zoe, you have the mic.
I'm hearing some background music. So such a joy to be able to participate in the panel tonight. And, all that I want to leave you with is something that Darren brought to the table, which, if I would inspire anything with us as we look forward to the rest of Black History Month, and not just Black History Month, but the entire year of celebrations of our lives, not just as Black people, but as Black queer people. Let our joy be our resistance, and let that resistance fuel our lives into even more great expressions of self as we continue to grow and as we continue to expand and take up space as a people. So this last tidbit that I believe we're going to close with is from my better half, Ms. Janae, my superwoman persona, supernova. And it was a song that I created while in Trinidad. It's called Love is Love. And it was created once again, very much from that place of using joy as resistance, specifically for the queer community.
Take it away, Maestro.
Just bubble for the love. Girl, bubble on love. Just bubble for the love. It's Miss Janae. Love is love. Love is love. Love is love. Love is love is love. Love is love. Love is love. Love is. When I say love, know what I mean. You are free to be unconditionally, not a feeling or emotion. Breathe, follow your heart's direction. It's a value for self, beyond looks and status and fame and wealth. It's looking in the mirror and say, love, again and again and again. Love is love. Love is love. Love is love. Love is love is love. Oh, your love is love is love. Oh, your love is love is love. Love is. My love is perfect and whole, powerful in its purity. I ask no forgiveness, beg no pardon. For my love, I have no apology. I want legislation, recognition, legal and social decriminalization to